Stopped counting the days lost in the rhythm.
Air travelers will now have 2 more years to upgrade their licenses and other forms of identification to B. The Department of Homeland Security announced Monday the new deadline will be May 7, 2025, allowing Americans more time following delays caused by the COVID pandemic. The old cutoff was slated for May 3, 2023. Americans wishing to trade their license or ID in for a compliant Real ID, which has a star symbol at the top of the card, must undergo a more stringent ID check during application. According to DHS, security features on Real IDs are designed to prevent counterfeiting and fraud, using documentary evidence and record checks to confirm travelers are who they claim to be. The Real ID will be required by travelers 18 or older to board a plane, enter a federal building or a military base. Passports, military IDs, or global entry cards also will qualify to pass through airport security. The Real ID Act was passed in the wake of that after several of the hijackers improperly obtained state IDs. All 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and 4 of 5 U.S. territories are covered by the Real ID Act. Under the law, following the enforcement deadline, federal agencies, including the Transportation Security Administration, will not accept driver's licenses and identification cards that do not meet Real ID standards. Over the past decade, Real ID enforcement has repeatedly stalled after states failed to comply with the security requirements for issuing the updated driver's licenses. But officials say this time, it's theft that's at fault, preventing Americans from accessing state motor vehicle departments to retrieve the updated identification. According to DHS, Real ID progress over the past 2 years has been significantly hindered by backlogs at state driver's licensing agencies created by the pandemic. According to a DHS official, states have primary responsibility for increasing the Real ID adoption rate, which currently stands at 52%, according to state-provided data. Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas said in a statement Monday that the extension will give states needed time to ensure their residents can obtain a Real ID-compliant license or identification card, adding, DHS will also use this time to implement innovations to make the process more efficient and accessible.
Al Jazeera to submit Shireen Abu Akleh case to ICC, network says. Al Jazeera said Tuesday it will submit a case to the International Criminal Court over the killing of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot in the head while covering an Israeli raid in Jenin in the occupied West Bank in May. Al Jazeera's legal team has conducted a full and detailed investigation into the case and unearthed new evidence based on several eyewitness accounts, the examination of multiple items of video footage, and forensic evidence pertaining to the case, Al Jazeera said in a statement. The network claims new evidence and video show the Palestinian-American journalist and her colleagues were directly fired at in a deliberate killing by what Al Jazeera called Israeli occupation forces, a claim which Israel has repeatedly denied. Israel's Prime Minister Yair Lapid Tuesday repeated a long-standing rejection that any outside authority would investigate Israel Defense Forces troops. No one will investigate IDF soldiers and no one will preach to us about morals in warfare, certainly not Al Jazeera, Lapid said. The IDF referred CNN questions about the ICC case to the Prime Minister's office and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which declined to comment. In September, the IDF admitted there is a high possibility Abu Akleh was accidentally shot and killed by Israeli fire aimed at suspects identified as armed Palestinian gunmen during an exchange of fire. The IDF said at the time the Israeli military did not intend to pursue criminal charges or prosecutions of any of the soldiers involved. A CNN investigation published 2 weeks after Abu Akleh was killed suggested that the fatal shot came from a position where IDF troops are known to have been positioned. The pattern of gunfire on a tree behind where she was standing at the time suggested that the gunfire was targeted rather than indiscriminate, an expert told CNN. The CNN investigation unearthed evidence, including 2 videos of the scene of the shooting, suggesting that there was no active combat, nor any Palestinian militants, near Abu Akleh in the moments leading up to her death. She was wearing a flak jacket identifying her as press at the time she was killed. Al Jazeera said Tuesday, the claim by the Israeli authorities that Shireen was killed by mistake in an exchange of fire is completely unfounded. The evidence presented to the office of the prosecutor confirms, without any doubt, that there was no firing in the area where Shireen was, other than the IOF shooting directly at her. The IOF inquiry that found there was no suspicion of any crime being committed is entirely undermined by the available evidence which has now been provided to the OTP. The evidence shows that this deliberate killing was part of a wider campaign to target and silence Al Jazeera, the network added. Abu Akleh's family also submitted an official complaint to the International Criminal Court earlier this year to demand justice for her death, Al Jazeera reported. CNN has contacted the ICC to confirm if they received the case.
Indonesia bans sex outside marriage in new criminal code. The new code, which will apply to Indonesians and foreigners alike, also prohibit cohabitation between unmarried couples. It will also ban insulting the president or state institutions, spreading views counter to the state ideology, and staging protests without notification. The laws were passed with support from all political parties. However, the code will not come into effect for 3 years to allow for implementing regulations to be drafted. Currently, Indonesia bans adultery but not premarital sex. Maulana Yusran, deputy chief of Indonesia's Tourism Industry Board, said the new code was totally counterproductive at a time when the economy and tourism were starting to recover from the pandemic. We deeply regret the government have closed their eyes. We have already expressed our concern to the Ministry of Tourism about how harmful this law is, he said. Foreign arrivals in the holiday destination of Bali are expected to reach pre-pandemic levels of 6 million by 2025, the Tourism Association has said previously, as the island recovers from the impacts of COVID-19. Indonesia is also trying to attract more so-called digital nomads to its tropical shores by offering a more flexible visa. Speaking at an investment summit, U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia Sung Kim said the news could result in less foreign investment, tourism and travel to the Southeast Asian nation. Criminalizing the personal decisions of individuals would loom large within the decision matrix of many companies determining whether to invest in Indonesia, he said. Albert Aries, a spokesperson for Indonesia's Justice Ministry, said the new laws regulating morality were limited by who could report them, such as a parent, spouse, or child of suspected offenders. These laws are part of a raft of legal changes that critics say undermine civil liberties in the world's third-largest democracy. Other laws include bans on black magic. A death for Indonesia's democracy. Editorials in national newspapers decried the new laws, with daily newspaper Koran Tempo saying the code has authoritarian tones, while the Jakarta Post said it had grave concerns about their application. Decades in the making, legislators hailed the passage of the criminal code as much-needed overhaul of a colonial vestige. The old code belongs to Dutch heritage and is no longer relevant now, Bambang Wuryanto, head of the parliamentary commission in charge of revising the code told lawmakers. Opponents of the bill have highlighted articles they say will curb free speech and represent a huge setback in ensuring the retention of democratic freedoms after the fall of authoritarian leader Suharto in 1998. This is not only a setback but a death for Indonesia's democracy, said Citra Referendum, a lawyer from Indonesia's Legal Aid Institute. The process has not been democratic at all. Responding to the criticism, Indonesia's Law and Human Rights Minister Yasona Lawli told Parliament, "It's not easy for a multicultural and multi-ethnic country to make a criminal code that can accommodate all interests." Legal experts say that an article in the Code on Customary Law could reinforce discriminatory and Sharia-inspired bylaws at a local level, and pose a particular threat to LGBT people. Regulations that are not in accordance with human rights principles will occur in conservative areas, said Bivitri Susantai, from the Indonesia Jentera School of Law, referring to existing bylaws in some regions that impose curfews on women, or target what are described as deviant sexualities. The new laws will also include more lenient sentences for those charged with corruption. The morality charges have been partially watered down from an earlier version of the bill so that they can only be reported by limited parties, such as a spouse, parent, or child. The government had planned to pass a revision of the country's colonial-era criminal code in 2019, but nationwide protests halted its passage. Lawmakers have since diluted down some of the provisions, with President Joko Widodo urging Parliament to pass the bill this year, before the country's political climate heats up ahead of the presidential elections scheduled for early 2024. The public response to the new code has been muted so far, with only small protests held in the capital on Monday and Tuesday.